Hi, I'm Philip Brunton and welcome to Jazz Play lesson number 7. This lesson introduces the full chord scale, taking us further beyond the pentatonic scales that we've been working with. We call them chord scales because the scale is a representation of the chord notes. In this lesson we're going to be playing modal jazz, which was introduced in the late 50s by innovators such as Miles Davis and George Russell. Modality gives us the opportunity to hear, learn, and create with these full range of scale colors. So at the top of the worksheet, you see a C major 7 chord. And the best scale to represent that would be obviously a C major scale. And you'll find between the 3rd and 4th note and the 7th and 8th that you have a semitone, and the rest of the notes form tones between each. Now all major scales share the same pattern of tones and semitones. So with this pattern, it allows you to play any major scale, just as based on your starting note and adjusting each note accordingly for the pattern by adding a key signature. Most of the music you'll listen to will probably be based on a major scale. And that major scale can also be called an Ionian mode, which is where we build all our other modes. So in this lesson, it's worth learning all your major scales in every key. As last week, we're going to play in every key using what's called the Tetra chord system. There's 4 notes in every bar, and the first 4 notes, the first bar, is the bottom half of a major scale, and the next bar is the top half, which also becomes the bottom half of another scale. So basically, by playing 12 bars, we've covered all 12 keys. So we're going to play all the major scales, which are Ionian modes, making use of 2 Tetra chords. So before we begin, let's have a tuning note, A440. Another one. Okay, next on your worksheet, you'll see a key signature clock. You might already know how this works, but for a quick review and for those who've never seen this before, the major scale keys are shown on the outside by the letters. And on the inner side circle, you can see the minor keys. Okay, and then, so at 12 o'clock we have C and major, and also 12 o'clock A minor. And then the key signature is shown for each of those hours. So you can see, if we look at D major, which is at 2 o'clock, you'll see there are 2 sharps. Now that's rather coincidental because 2 sharps for 2 o'clock. So that also is great about this clock here. If you go to 3 o'clock, it'll be 3 sharps. And then if you go backwards on the clock, 3 hours backwards, you'd have E flat major, which is 3 flats. Okay. So also on this clock, it also helps us work out what flats will be in order. So at 11 o'clock we have F, and that's where we start our sharps. F, second sharp is always C, following along clockwise, then G, then D, A, E sharp, etc. And then at 10 o'clock, we're going to work our way backwards through the order of flats. You always have your first flat in the key signatures, B flat, then E flat, working your way back, A flat, and then D flat, and then G flat would be the order of flats. So you can use this clock to work out all your keys, and we're going to be learning our major scales in all keys so we can make use of this clock. Now it's best to learn your major scales in your full range of your instrument rather than just 1 octave or 2 octaves, etc. But what I've shown you is a 2 octave from C here underneath the clock, And that will cover a good range for almost every instrument. Everybody should be able to cover this. But once you've learned how to do it on 2 octaves C, you can make use of it, working it out for your own instruments for the full range if you wish. So what we're going to do is you're going to pick your starting note of your key. And in this case, I'll show you first C major. And you play all the way up, ascend, and then descend with a key signature. So, good example, C major 7. So what if you want to do G major? Find your starting note, and you'll see up to 5th, and so you'll see up on the 5th note there, where your G is, you're going to ascend all the way to the top, descend all the way back to the bottom, and back to the G. And we want to make sure we get the right key signature, so we look at our clock and we can find G is 1 sharp, and that would be F sharp. So then we play it that way. So if F major 7 major scale is, we look at F major on the clock and we see it's 1 flat, 1 hour backwards. So we go from F all the way up to the top, down, and back to the F. So you notice I swung this with the articulation, the swing articulation. You can do it straight, you can do it all tongued every note or all slurred. It's up to you. You try it different ways. So my advice is to get used to that in every single key. Take your starting note, ascend, descend, the full range of your instrument, and then come back. On page 2, we introduced all the modes. You can see the C major scale or Ionian mode shown there in 2 octaves. Now the pitch axis is the starting note. So in the case of C Ionian, the pitch axis is C. And C major is a major based mode because the 3rd note has that major 3rd. So let's move our pitch axis up to the D. And you'll see we have what's called a D Dorian scale now. And it's minor bass because the 3rd of that D Dorian would be a minor 3rd sound. And then we just continue. We have the pitch axis up to the E, the 3rd note, and that's a Phrygian mode you'll get as a minor bass. The 4th, you'll see on your sheet, is a Lydian, and that's a major bass. Then we have our G Mixolydian, which is major bass. And then up to the 6th, we have the Aeolian, which is what we call the natural minor scale, and that's minor bass, obviously. And then we have the 7th note, pitch axis, the B, is the Locrian, and that's minor bass because the minor 3rd. Okay, for every mode, there's what's called a characteristic note. It's the note or notes that are slightly different comparing it to the major or the minor. So if we look at G Mixolydian mode, it's major based, and when compared to a major scale, it's going to have a lowered 7th note. So that's this characteristic note. The 7th note is lowered. And if we look at D Dorian, it's a minor based, so comparing it to the natural minor, not the harmonic or melodic minor, the natural minor, also known as the Aeolian, comparing it to the Aeolian scale, you'll notice that it has a raised 6th note, the Dorian. A raised 6th is the characteristic note of a Dorian. So you can see all the major bass, minor bass, and the characteristic notes of every mode there. So all these modes are based on the major scale, and that's why it's worth knowing that major scale in every key. And all we're doing is changing the pitch axis for the different modes. Okay. So one of the most familiar modes used in modality is the Dorian mode. And you'll find this mode is ideal for a minor 7 chord. So on your sheet you'll see a D minor 7 chord and the D Dorian mode that's followed. And you can see the pitch axis shown as the 1st. You can see the 1, 3, 5, 7 from the quarter is in the mode. We can still see where the semitones are, just as we had in the major scale. And there's our characteristic note, the 6th note, which happened to be in normal tonality. The 6th note, if you remember right, is the avoidance note. But in modality, totally different than tonality. In modality, that's a characteristic note we want to bring out. Okay, so to learn our Dorians in every key, we're going to do the tetrachord system again. And instead of 2 major bass tetrachords, we're going to do 2 minor bass tetrachords put together, whereas the first bar is the bottom half of one scale, which is also the top half of another Dorian. So you can see how that works out together. So let's play exercise number 2, minor bass tetrachords putting together to create a Dorian mode in all 12 keys. So just like learning the major keys before in the full range of your instrument, or at least in this exercise what we had today is the 2 octaves, we can do the same with the Dorians. So you can see where I've shown the C notes all the way up 2 octaves, and as I say, you can do the full range of your instrument if you wish. And we'll have our starting note, and the first one I'm going to show is C minor 7, the C Dorian. So the first thing we need to do is go back to our clock. And if you've ever traveled before on planes, you sometimes go to a new country and you have to change the clock backwards or forwards. So it's the same when we change modes. Think of it as different traveling to different areas. So we're going to have to change your clock. When we go to a Dorian, we're going to go 2 hours backwards. Done that before. So if we're looking at C minor 7, which we're looking for a C Dorian, we look at our clock, which C is at 12 o'clock there. We're going to go backwards 2 hours. And we notice it has 2 flats backwards. Okay, that's the B flat, where B flat is shown. B flat major, 2 flats. So C Dorian has 2 flats in it. So I'll give you an example. So if we look at G minor 7, G Dorian, we find G, go back 2 hours. It's the same as F major. So that would be 1 flat. You see, I'm reminding yourself that we go all the way up the top and descending all the way down the bottom and returning back to our starting note. And then we're going to do F minor 7, F Dorian. So we find our F, go backwards 2 hours, and that would be the same as E flat, 3 flats. Okay, so that's the F Dorian. So basically when you're working out your Dorians from any key, just find your starting note, ascend, descend, come back, making use of your 2 hours difference on your clock. Okay, let's move on to page 3, the Mixolydian mode. So the Mixolydian mode is the best mode for a dominant 7th chord. So we can see at the top of page 3 we have a G7 chord, and there is your scale, which is showing your 1, 3, 5, and 7, your semitones, your characteristic note. If you remember from Mixolydian, compared to a major, is the 7th note is lowered. Okay, and as before, we're going to play it in every key using the Tetra chord system. So different with these, the first half of a Mixolydian scale is a major tetrachord, and the top half is the minor tetrachord. So you've already played the major and minor tetrachords, so you'll find this easy. And you're getting an extra exercise by playing this, because by playing your minor based tetrachord next to a major based, you get what's called a melodic minor scale. So in this exercise, we're playing the Mixolydian scale and the melodic minors together. And so because we're having to create our Mixolydians based on major and minor tetrachords, this exercise is twice as long. So it's 24 bars instead of 12. So this is exercise number 3, making use of major and minor tetrachords for Mixolydian modes. So with the Mixolydian, when we're looking at our key signature clock, we have a difference of time here. We need to go backwards 1 hour on your clock. So the first one is C7, C Mixolydian. We find the C, we go back 1 hour, and it's F, and that's 1 flat. So we play C7, C Mixolydian with 1 flat. If you want to do G7, we find the G 1 hour backwards, the same as the C on the clock, and so we have no sharps, no flats. And then F7, you can find that, and then which that's at 11 o'clock, go back an hour, it's 10 o'clock, and that's the B flat, 2 flats. F7 and F Mixolydian, 2 flats. Okay, so Mixolydian is based on the fifth of a major, and it's rather handy because 1 hour is a fifth difference on the clock. And I remind you, the Dorian was based on the second note of the major, or 2 hours difference on the clock. So feel free to be able to play all those different modes in all the keys, working your way through either the 2-octave range or the entire range of your instrument. Really great. Okay, so let's go to page 4 on your worksheet, and we'll have an opportunity to do some improvising in modality. So pre-modality, we had what was called the bebop music, which chords changed very rapidly, and they reflected tonality. Everything reflected a key center. So now we have, in the late 50s, we introduced this modality. So what establishes modality different than bebop is where chords were changing all the time. Here in modality, chords would hold at least for 4 bars, if not 8 bars sometimes. It gave us much more freedom to sit and appreciate the colors of every mode that we were playing with. So in your soloing with modes, a couple ideas to think about. First of all, the pitch axis. Bringing out the pitch axis with repetition is really useful. And we can also build cadences in our melody around this pitch axis with surround tones and approach notes going to our target note of the pitch axis. And then, as I said before, we have a characteristic note of each mode, and it's great to bring that out. So here's an example at the top of page 4. I've just shown you where you have some pitch axis being repeated, we have the characteristic note being brought out, we have some approach surround tones and approach tones to our target pitch axis. So a good example here. Now the freedom that modality offers us can also be reflected in the rhythms we choose. And also want to bring across what you hear sequences in a lot of modality. Sequence is when you take a pattern of notes and then you start it from a different note within the mode, keeping the same pattern. So here's an example of a sequence, and also being more free with our rhythms. Okay, it's time to improvise now in modality. And what I've given you is a chord progression which you might recognize from Herbie Hancock's Cantaloupe Island. Okay, so it starts with a Dorian mode for 4 bars, and followed by a Mixolydian for 4 bars, another Dorian, and repeat of the final 4 bars is the same as the first 4 bars of a Dorian. For your improvisation today, I really want you to explore the individual colors of each mode, rather than just start adding lots of fancy substitute pentatonics into your improvisation solo to sound really outside and inside. Just explore that individual color. So I'll give you an example of 2 times through, just using the modes. know how Kenloop Island goes. It's the chord progression from Kenloop Islands. It's a much more freer approach to this, and it really allows you to sit back and explore those scales, the colors of each scale. So it's your turn. 4 times through we'll go. Give you the opportunity to see where it takes you. Okay? 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, next. Back to the top. Well done. I hope you've enjoyed modality. It's a totally different style than what we're doing with the bebop in the next lesson. I recommend practicing these modes in all the keys, especially the majors, because that'll help us in the next lesson. Along with a review of your pentatonics can be very helpful. So I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. Bye for now.